All right. All right. We can start a discussion. First of all, big thanks to Derek for facilitating a discussion. I know it's so hard to get this group to talk, and he struggled mightily, but still he managed, right? I enjoyed listening to the class and, everyone's participation. I just told Wesley afterwards, I said, it just struck me the kind of maturity, perspective, wisdom coming from everyone's comments. I'm thinking, that's really, really good. So y'all just lent so much to it, and I appreciate him facilitating. So, I will continue talking a little bit about Ecclesiastes. I don't know how long we could go on for more weeks, and we'll just see how we're doing. But what Derek was doing last week is similar to what I'm trying to do. Is this isn't just a nihilistic work. Everything's bleak. Let's just all slit our wrists and die because life is miserable. It's not really that. It is bringing up the point that if all you're looking at is this limited horizon of what occurs under the sun, and you're trying to find ultimate meaning there, it's pretty depressing. That is meaningless. And a lot of the things you might try and do in this world to secure some sort of purpose and meaning is chasing the wind. But that's not the overall perspective. So I want to start with this question before we look. We're going to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 4. If you want to find your way to that chapter, we'll look at some specifics. But I am biased. I mean, I do see more hopefulness, as it were, between the lines of what he's saying. So that is my bias. But I want to start with a general question. So he declares, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It's meaningless. It's chasing after the wind. Let me ask a question. What are some things that the Ecclesiastes writer does not discuss? So what does he discuss and says meaningless? Well, working real hard and hoping that you can somehow do something permanent through your labor. That's meaningless. But what doesn't he discuss? You thought about what he doesn't talk about and declare to be meaningless?
Relationships and families?
Yes. The one time he talks about relationships, he says, eat, drink, and enjoy the wife of your youth. And the point of the wife of your youth is stick with the relationship you started out with, right? That's the point. It's grow something, build something. Who's the young woman you married early on? Find value there. So the one time he talks about relationship, it's very positive, isn't it? But generally, he never talks, children, meaningless, chasing after the wind, having children, starting a family, getting married, having relationship. He says nothing of the sort. He does not speak to relationships and declare them to be meaningless. Because he wouldn't, right? Because they're not. In fact, that's the real substantive kernel of a meaningful life is, as I'll often say at funerals, I have this little thing I say, at the end, it's about who loved us and who we loved. That's what matters at the funeral. Who loved us and who did we love in return? Right? Everything else, where they worked, achievements in life, no. Who did they love and who loved them, right? So he doesn't talk about relationships and declare those meaningless or chasing after the wind. Doesn't talk about love. Does he ever say anything about love? Not really. Right? Doesn't talk about love because if he said, love is meaningless, we'd have to chuck it out of the canon, right? We'd have to say this book doesn't belong. Right? God is love. If you declare love is meaningless and to attempt to love is chasing after the wind, this wouldn't even be true. But see, he never says anything about love, never says anything about relationships, never says anything about the value of having a family, children, spouses. Never addresses any of that. Anything else he doesn't address? Or at least doesn't address it and declare it to be meaningless? I would say virtue. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, humility. Did he ever say, here's humility, but you know what? It's utterly meaningless to try and be humble. No, in fact, when he does recommend things, you often hear it's about those sorts of things. Well, do this. He never disparages joy. Now, he might question where you're going to find it, where you're hoping to find your joy, but he doesn't disparage joy in and of itself. Because he says, eat, drink, and be merry. I mean, find joy, find happiness in your work, find happiness in the wife of your youth, find happiness in what God has given you. So he's not against joy. He's very much against hoping you're going to find joy in something that is temporary, that you can't control, like in, something material, right?
When you journal, aren't you a little negative?
When you what?
When you journal, aren't you a bit negative?
Yeah. So there's a lot I would say he's not talking about, and that's as important as what he is talking about, right? The things he doesn't mention as meaningless. All right, so let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 4, starting in the first verse. Just going to kind of go through and try and hear, please, let's talk about it, ask questions. What is he saying? Because sometimes, admittedly, kind of its poetic style and its conservation of words. I mean, like a lot of poetry, there's a few words and you're trying to infer a lot from a kind of concise statement. And some of it's open to interpretation for sure. But let's start in the first verse. Ecclesiastes 4:1. Then I looked again at all the acts of oppression which are being done under the sun. And behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them. I think there's something very interesting going on in this verse. So what do you see in this? And it's kind of a proverb, a statement. This is what I saw. I looked at oppression as it occurs in this world. Here's what I saw. Separation. There's the oppressed and the oppressors. And he repeats twice the phrase, they had no one to comfort them.
Is he referring to the oppressors in that second one? Or
Oh, I think so. Because, see, this is where this is wisdom. This is understanding the human condition. Is an oppressor themselves oppressed? Well, not in earthly terms, but are they joyful people full of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness? No. Are they, if they're oppressors, there's some sort of pathology of misery going on in their lives.
It's never enough.
Yeah, it's never enough. Or they got abused and so they're abusing others.
Yeah.
Right? It's always a terrible story behind it. So when you see someone who's an oppressor, he knows they got no one to comfort them either. They're suffering. That's why they're awful. Right? It's not making light of the fact they're awful and they've got power to hurt others. But are they free of hurt? See, I think his wisdom is everybody's hurting. Now, what does this help us do? His perspective gets us away from us versus them, good people versus bad people. Right? It brings us into what we could say is a non-dualistic way of looking at the world. Every single human being suffers in one way or another, even if they're the most powerful. in this world, in worldly terms, even if they have great power, they themselves suffer. And they themselves need comfort. Right? I think that's a kind of truth that helps us be merciful with everyone, not with just certain people. Like, well, there's the oppressed. We need to be caring about them, but we need to really be hard on the... Well, yeah, the oppressors are doing evil, but there's a compassionate place to be, to realize they're oppressed in a way too, and they're not comforted. That's part of the bitterness of why they treat their neighbors so. Right?
Here's a thought.
Yeah.
So, my tendency would be for the person that you aren't particularly attracted to, not to do anything, just stay away from them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But it makes me think, maybe be a little more assertive or aggressive in terms of really getting to know people and find out more about them, and maybe if they need help and comfort, it might be a little harder to get through to them, but
Right.
be willing to listen and hear their story, because you know that deep down inside they need friendship and care.
Right.
But you have to kind of push through it.
It-
I'm introvert too, so.
Yeah. No, well said. Yeah. That everyone needs comforting. Everyone's hurting. And when I realize that, someone may have a hard shell up and all their behaviors just seem to be aggressive towards others and they hurt others. But in there's some hurt. That's why their behavior is disordered. It is not who they were made to be. They're out of sync with themselves. They don't even know it. They may actually think what they're doing is the right way. It all goes, the winners. I want to be a winner, and I just need to step on other people to win. They may truly believe that, but they're caught up in a pathology, a deadliness to their own humanity. So, yeah, like Cobby's saying, it may take more work for us to try and be there for that person and know they ultimately need a comfort just like the rest of us. And we can give that to one another. I wonder about him saying they had no one to comfort. Is that kind of a suggestion? Well, why don't you step up? If you look around in the world and you see lots of oppression and everyone's suffering, but there's no one to comfort.
But they're not going to diagnose their misery as the lack of comfort that you could provide.
Well, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. Right? I diagnose my misery in other ways too.
Right.
But kind of what Leah was saying about our time Wednesday night was the power. No, and the group was careful not to retell. So you told some struggle, some grief, and they played it back to you in an improv sort of way. But they were careful not to wrap a bow around it. They were just retelling it. They weren't making it all pretty. If you said this, they just tried to reflect it back to you. You said, what's the value? You didn't give me an answer. And that's what, at the end, Leah and someone else said, the two together said, but the power was in you were heard. You got to tell your story. And these people reenacted it and just basically said, see, we heard what you said. And we kind of played it out for you to, we didn't try to make it all better. We didn't minimize it, because that's always minimizing it when you kind of say, oh, it's all okay. No, it's not okay. Not if you're saying, but this is my grief. Well, where was the power? The power was, there was a comfort in knowing someone else had heard it. The actors heard it well and played it back. It was interesting, right? It was an interesting experience. No answers, but that sense of community. Somebody listened, and that's comforting. So, yeah, it doesn't matter how I diagnose it or they diagnose it. We humans need others to hear us and to know that they're non-judgmental and they say, well, I'm sorry that you've struggled with that. Not to judge it. You shouldn't have struggled with that. Why didn't you get over that? No, to hear it, not judge it, and just say, I'm sorry you're grieving that.
Saying, the powerful around themselves, people do ears, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
But that's insulating, and that doesn't bring them what they want either. That's not the comfort, right? So they're caught up in just as much of an oppressive situation. Everyone's a victim. I'm not talking about let's play victimhood, but until we realize everyone's been victimized somewhere in life and how they've responded to it. Sometimes we respond by great aggression and build a hard shell and do unto others before they can do unto me, but that's a response to hurt, right? That's not coming from some good place in my life. That's my strategy of how I'm not going to hurt again, so I'm going to do this, right?
The word comfort, would that be that they're not being loved is the same thing?
Yeah, that'd be an aspect of love, yeah. Because when someone's well loved, they're comforted, right?
Greg, where did that come from? Before you sinned, you were sinned against. Where is that?
I heard that from David Bentley Hart. He may not be the only one who said it, but he was making that point. Is the whole idea of the kind of ubiquitous of sin? How did Adam's sin pass on to all of us? He goes more in the direction of, well, someone sinned against you before you ever sinned. I mean, yeah. When you were a small child, you experienced life in its imperfectness, right? Disappointment, or you were mistreated in some way. It doesn't have to be, horrific mistreatment, but just in even the little ways. So you took that in, and what we tend to do is pass it on, right? The boss is mean to me, I go home and kick the dog. I just, here, the dog's wondering, what did I do? But we tend to transmit our pain rather than let it be transformed, which is what Jesus does on the cross. He takes the pain and he says, Father, forgive them. He doesn't transmit it. He doesn't pass on the pain to anyone else, the hurt. That's really hard, and I can't do it myself, right? It's going to take God to help me to somehow get away from doing unto others as they have done unto me. That's the got to get past. Okay, Tim, you had a...
Yeah, well, and Ken brought this up, but it's like, when did all these separations start? These divisions, these things that, we continue through today.
Right.
And we're constantly being divided. How do we resolve?
Yeah. Well, and that's a story. To me, especially if we read the Genesis garden account and what follows, it's a series of separations. Adam and Eve from creation. It becomes a hostile relationship, right? Well, first, before that, they separate themselves from God. Then the consequence is they're separated from the natural world. And then they have children, and one kills the other. I mean, it's a series of separation. And I personally, I read that not as a history, but as a paradigm for humanity. Mm-hmm. In other words, this is my story. It's not, that's ancient people. They did some weird things. No, this is my story. I have done all those same separations, right? I've followed that pattern. Like the quote-unquote sin of Adam is my sin. Have I sought independence from any sort of transcendent reality of God? Well, yeah, I've tried to do my own thing. Have I separated myself from some sort of communion and oneness with the world, the natural world? Well, yeah, I've done that too. Have I separated myself from others and animosity and jealousy, and did I metaphorically slay them? Yeah. So it's my story. Where did the separation come from? It's endemic to our human tendencies, right? It's what we do in ignorance. We fracture all these relationships. And we pass it on. And so it becomes this common human experience. And then the answer to all that is God healing all the relationships. That's what God is about, is everything coming back to oneness. We've fractured it. God did not separate himself from us. We have separated ourselves from God, from creation, from one another. And then, like Ephesians 1, 9 and 10, that God is going to sum up all things in Christ Jesus, things in heaven and on earth. It's all coming. So the story is of human division, separation, and divine reunification and oneness. and overcoming all of the sin that is the source of our separation, our jealousies, our angers, our hurts. That all has to be overcome so that we can be brought back together in love.
And that's why Jesus came.
To show us that process, yeah.
Because I see everything in the form of a meeting. And it was a big meeting in heaven. And it's just a mess when they look down here. And God said, I guess you're just going to have to go down here. And he did. I mean, God with us is so powerful. And then he boiled everything down. All the laws, he boiled down to two things. I mean, we never would have known that if Jesus hadn't showed up in person.
No, exactly. We would have done what was being done, is turn the law into another means of oppression and division. Well, there's the sinners and there's the good people. Right. Well, we just took a law that Jesus says is all about loving your neighbor and found ways to divide from our neighbors over the law. Right? Oh, I can't go with those people because they're sinning. And it's like, without God, we'll take what is designed to bring us together and find that as the means to separate us. How often is church a means of separation? We're going to decide whether you can have communion or not. We're going to decide whether you can be a member or not. We're going to decide whether you're in or not, or out. This is supposed to be the reuniting of the world. It's not supposed to be another means by which we determine who's worthy, who's not worthy, who's in, who's out. But we humans are great at taking anything good and making it more of the problem. Right? Yeah, John David.
One of my favorite things that we ever did in a Sunday school was a 4-week lecture on barriers to forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody remember that one? It was a long time ago. It was probably 10 years. I did.
Barriers to forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, it stuck with me. I love it. And it was therapeutic.
Class.
It was therapeutic for a lot of people. Like, a lot of people were sharing, I went through this and it's really hard to forgive. So I just wanted to go back to your question about resolving. And, Greg was talking about the Genesis narrative. Then you get to Genesis 4 and it just sort of, everything's compounding on itself. And then Lamech talks to his wife and his wives, and says, pay attention to my words, for I have killed a man for wounding me, a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged 70 times, then Lamech, and then Hebrew is difficult here. Sometimes it says 7 times 7, sometimes it says 70, and then an additional 7, and sometimes 70 times 7. If you think about where Jesus comes in,
70 times 7, wow.
Yeah.
He's
that
just turned that
resolution
thing around.
is
Yeah.
Peter. He flips it.
Yeah, it's Lamech in the reverse.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, because you're right. The whole thing's unraveling, and it unravels at Babel, right? Then all the division of all the nations at the Tower of Babel. These stories, and I take them, and you don't have to, but I take them to be, the point is they're telling us who we are and the human predicament. And so finally, the last, of those stories, that's even after the Noah thing, is the Tower of Babel and the confusion of all the peoples, and then all the ethnic separations. So where do we start off when Genesis really gets rolling, which is chapter 11? God calls Abraham. What's the situation? Everything's divided. Everything's separated. People from the earth, people from each other, nations from nature, nations. Everything's ruined. And God says, okay, I'm going to pick this guy over here, and we're going to start putting it back together. I'm going to call a guy named Abram who worships a moon god, and I'm going to start putting things back together, right? There's a lot here in Ecclesiastes, right? Okay. Well, maybe we're a little bit, but see, that first verse I think is so full of possibilities, right? All right.
It's really central. Sorry.
No, go ahead. No.
But that's the crux of the gospel, right? That is Jesus' message in a nutshell, right? To love even your enemy and give yourself.
Right.
And then the power of that,
Right.
that awareness of it, of that dynamic being true.
Yeah. See,
Central.
I would say you can see the gospel hinted at here in Ecclesiastes 4:1. When you realize that everyone's oppressed, even the oppressors have no one to comfort, you start realizing everyone needs a savior, right? It starts to change the dynamic of us versus them to everybody's suffering here. Everybody, yeah. you get down to that seems to be the message. You can even find it hinted at. All right. Let's push on a little bit. Read some more. So, verse 2. Because everyone's suffering. Everyone's oppressed. Doesn't matter who you are. You got your hurts. You got your story. Some things went wrong. So I congratulate the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still living. But better off than both of them is the one who has never existed, who has never seen the evil activity that is done under the sun. Okay, so what do we take out of 2 and 3? Or how can we take that? What are some ways to take that? If you took it metaphorically, right? So as Jesus claims, all Scripture is talking about me. You search the Scripture, you think in them you have life, and they talk about me. So he would say, Ecclesiastes talk about me. Ecclesiastes 4, 2 and 3 is talking about me. How do you read Ecclesiastes 2 and 3? Which sounds like, well, dang, who wants to live, right? Because life brings suffering, and better those who've gone through it and are done with it, gone to the grave. Better even the person who never lived. At least they never experienced any of this suffering. So how do we read that in light of Christ? How might we read the dead in verse 2 and the living?
Death and resurrection.
Yeah, death and resurrection, right? Because we tend to read it like those who are still breathing and those who have passed from this life. But what did Jesus encourage us to do? To die, and then we would truly live? What if the message is better are those who are dead than those who are still living? He doesn't mean necessarily, or maybe he means it doesn't matter. What we can read it in light of Christ is better those who have died to themselves, who have taken up their cross, than those who are still living prior to having done that. They still struggle with the world. They fight it. But those who have died, they've given up that kind of struggle of fighting the world. So see, I would read it that way as a Christian. And it's true. Better off those who have died than those who are still trying to fix the world, right? Or fix themselves, or living prior to that surrender.
Is there a way to die and not be kind of a doormat?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. Because I think Jesus is exemplifying that, and he's not a doormat. But it's a struggle to figure out.
I
Yeah.
had a boss who I decided, like, I'm just going to die to myself. And I was happier, but then some of the other people in my life just were like, he is treating you like trash ever since you adopted this approach. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I am kind of being a bit of a doormat. And I don't know how to not be that way. This was an old boss.
Right. Well, before you made that decision, was he treating you like trash?
Yeah, he wasn't treating me well.
So my question would be,
I was happier when I just surrendered to it.
right. And so if he's going to treat you poorly, you can fight that, or you can just accept it. Now, AA will talk about acceptance is the key to everything. Accepting life on life's terms is one of their phrases. You know, the serenity prayer. Help me to change the things I can and help me to accept the things I can't, and give me the wisdom to know the difference. If I can't change my boss, now I can change my job.
I did.
Right, exactly. You did what you could do, but if you can't, the thing you can't change, there is a wisdom in accepting it, because that's just reality. It is what it is, and if I can't change it, I can hate it, I can fight against it, and I'm going to be miserable because I can't change it. Or I can accept this is it, and I can find a better peace. Now, if it's something I can change, like I don't have to work for this guy, well, by all means, go look for another job, right? Because you can change that, but can you change him? No.
Greg, what does it say about, though, we got like a more personal thing, your boss, right? But what does this say about taking on bigger causes, like I would like to, like Jimmy Carter wanted to eradicate guinea worm and other things, where you're actually fighting the system? Is that, how does that talk to the profit or futility of that?
Well, I think if you have realistic expectations, I mean, I think it's good to try and do even systemic things that help people. That's good. If you think that heaven will arrive on earth through these means, you will end up being bitter and disappointed. And I'll quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his book Life Together. He says, at first you get angry with the people for not going along with what you were trying to get them to do. Then you'll get angry with yourself for having failed to bring about what you're trying to do. And finally, you will be angry with God, for he did not bring about what you wanted to be done. Okay, that I think is wise. That's the descent into real bitterness. So I'm gonna solve some social problem. First, I'll get angry with people because I can't get them on board. Then I'll be angry with myself. I guess I'm a failed leader. Finally, I'll get angry with God. Why doesn't God, step up? Because this is obviously what needs to happen.
Okay.
So we have to guard against putting our hopes and dreams in that. This is my opinion. I'm showing you where I'm getting the backing for it. So I would go with, I've said this before, Dorothy Soele, who was a German theologian and social activist. Her book, Silent Cry, she said the proper posture is to work against what is wrong with no expectation of success.
That's good. I like that.
Wow.
Right? Because you're not going to end up depressed and upset because you never thought it would work anyway. You just knew this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to keep doing it. And she, in her own story, she was German, so this is back, they were opposing nuclear proliferation. And they would do different things to try and keep the spread of nuclear weapons, especially on German soil, aimed towards the Russians or to the Soviet Union. She was opposing that. She ever think any progress would be made? None whatsoever. But she knew this is not a good thing. And she told the story as well in her book about opposing apartheid in South Africa. And they're doing it from Europe by boycotting, boycotting different products from South Africa, trying to say we don't agree with apartheid, the system that's there. Never thought apartheid would ever go away in South Africa. So I like her position. Work, try, but don't link your joy to success, just to you just got to keep doing it, saying it's the right thing to do. And then you're pleasantly surprised if anything actually changes.
Well, and I got to give a good example with Cow Valley Healthcare with dental care.
Okay.
Because we did a survey early on when we first started to see what people needed, and they identified vision and dental care as what they needed and couldn't get. And I always said, and I've had bad teeth since I was 5 years old, so dental is special to me. And so when we started dental care, this came through the community, this idea to do this, but people would say, well, how's it coming? And I had the expectation of helping a few people. And I said, trying to get dental care for poor people is like trying to dig the Grand Canyon with a spoon. But I said, I'm starting to get a little pile of dirt here. My expectation was really low. And sure enough, every person that you help feel better and do better, that's a little bit of progress.
Yep.
Because basically my secret to life is low expectations. I don't expect a whole lot. And so when good things happen, it's just gravy. It's all a good thing. And sure enough, it's turned out that we've helped, like 20,000 people get some dental care. But it was low expectations and trying to dig that hole with a spoon.
Yeah.
So that's really helped. And I called a dentist one time, an oral surgeon, to come and help us, and he said, "Well, I can't help you." It's Dr. Buck. Some of y'all know him. He said, "I can't help you because I'm in the rocking chair now." And he said, "I'm on the porch in the rocking chair, and I can't help you. I can't help." And he said, "Trying to get oral surgeons to volunteer is like pulling teeth." And I said, and I loved him, and I said, "I know that, Dr. Buck." And sure enough, over the 25 years, now we have 3 dentists that are employed there and are helping more
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And it's a huge
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
But if you keep those low expectations, then you're real happy with the little bit of progress.
Yeah. To tie it to the Hebrews passage, it's to keep looking for a city whose builder or maker is God, even though you don't expect to find that city.
Right, yeah.
Right? And Dorothy said it's not the Exodus that is the paradigm, like deliverance from slavery. It's living in Babylon that's the paradigm.
Right.
Because the Exodus story is about victory and deliverance. The living in Babylon story is about buckle down, as the prophets say, pray for the good of this city and plant your gardens and get married and live life because you're living life in Babylon, right? She said that's the orientation of resistance for the good without the expectation. And then lo and behold, if Babylon falls, we weren't expecting that, Okay, Jim, you had a...
I'm good. I think you could have covered.
Okay. Derek, you get the last...
Well, I just wanted to make this, because I think John David's point was interesting about being a doormat. And I think, I don't know the story, but it sounds like that's exactly what you stopped being, So on one level, I can see how superficial it would look that way to your friends, but you took the power back, right? You said, well, you don't have you can treat me poorly, and I accept that, but I'm not, I'm at liberty to translate that to maintain my own, view of it. And you did that. And I think that's, again, like central to the gospel like this is where we get our power back is not by winning in this, you play a different game.
Right. Because sometimes you also can take your power back by choosing to accept it. It's my choice, right? I choose to put up with certain situations, right? But I'm choosing that, full well knowing. So maybe then we, a beatitude like, "Blessed are you when men persecute you and say all manners of evil against you for my name's sake. For great is your reward in heaven. For so they treated the prophets who were before you." See, that's a choice, right? It's not a doormat like, "Oh, I'm forced into this." I make the choice sometimes to endure something, and that's not being a doormat, right? So anyway, there's a lot of nuance and possibilities to think about. What does it mean to live?
God's trying to speak to you in those circumstances sometimes.
There's something to hear, right? And what I would spend most of the time doing is trying to think, and how do I see this happening in Jesus? Because Jesus accepted, but also resisted, but also, it's all nuanced in Jesus. He and his expectations are pretty realistic. He doesn't expect all of Jerusalem to be won over, but he doesn't also stop doing what he's doing.
And it doesn't come across like a doormat.
No, and he doesn't come across like a doormat. So, and he died on the cross, right? And accomplished everything paradoxically that no one thought he was doing, right? Which is the other part is sometimes we have to come to the realization that the cross is the way in which things are done. And often we don't want that to be the way things are done, metaphorically, but in his case, literally, right?
You want to call 10,000.
Yeah, we want to, get those angels down here. We're going to wipe out these bad people. Exactly, yeah, we want to do that path. We want to be like the disciples who are packing swords. What in the world are they packing swords for? Where did Jesus ever tell them to pack swords, right? To be armed and dangerous. They didn't get that from Jesus. That was their own idea about how we're going to solve this problem, right? Okay. We're going to have a fellowship meal. If you can stay, we'd love you to do that. But we'll stop class for now. We're dismissed.